What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors walks onto a late-night talk show expecting a conversation and instead gets ambushed by a host with an agenda? In just 34 seconds of one comment, Bill Maher would go from smug television personality to the man who pushed Samuel L. Jackson too far. The studio lights were hot that evening. Samuel L. Jackson sat across from Bill Maher on the set of Real Time, a show known for its provocative discussions and controversial takes. Jackson had been invited to talk about his latest film project, a passion piece that had taken him years to develop. He was relaxed, professional, ready for what he thought would be a straightforward interview, but Maher had other plans. The interview started innocently enough. Maher welcomed Jackson with his typical sardonic smile, the kind that always seemed to hide something beneath the surface. They exchanged pleasantries about Jackson's career, his iconic roles, the usual talk show fare. The audience laughed at the right moments. Everything seemed normal. Then Maher shifted in his seat. "So, Samuel," Maher began, his tone changing slightly, becoming more pointed. "Let's talk about something real for a second. You've made a career playing these tough guy roles, these characters who don't take anything from anyone. But in real life, you Hollywood types seem pretty quiet about certain issues, don't you think?" Jackson's expression remained neutral, but there was a flicker in his eyes, a warning sign that Maher either didn't notice or didn't care about. "I'm not sure what you mean, Bill," Jackson replied evenly. Maher leaned forward, that smirk growing wider. "Come on, you know exactly what I mean. You guys love to lecture everyone about politics, about social issues, but when it comes to actually putting your money where your mouth is, where are you? I mean, you're sitting here in your expensive suit, probably got driven here in some luxury car, and you want to tell regular Americans how to live their lives?" The audience fell silent. This wasn't the playful banter they'd expected. This was something else entirely. Jackson shifted in his chair, his jaw tightening. "Bill, I came here to talk about my film, not to be attacked for my beliefs or my career." "Attacked?" Maher laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the studio. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. You can't handle even the slightest pushback. This is a conversation, Samuel. Or are you too sensitive for that?" "I can handle a conversation just fine," Jackson said, his voice dropping lower, more controlled. "What I don't appreciate is being invited somewhere under false pretenses so you can grandstand and make yourself feel superior." Maher's smile faltered for just a moment before returning, even more condescending than before. "False pretenses? I'm asking you legitimate questions. Questions that my audience wants answered. Or do you think you're above being questioned?" "I think," Jackson said slowly, "that there's a difference between asking questions and being disrespectful. And right now, you're crossing that line." The tension in the studio was thick enough to cut with a knife. Crew members exchanged nervous glances. The audience sat frozen, unsure whether to react or stay silent. Maher, sensing he was losing control of the situation, decided to double down. "Disrespectful? Let me tell you what's disrespectful. What's disrespectful is actors like you making millions of dollars and then turning around and playing the victim. You know what regular people deal with? They don't get to sit in makeup chairs and have people kiss up to them all day. They work real jobs." Jackson's hands gripped the armrests of his chair. "Are you seriously suggesting that what I do isn't real work? That I haven't earned what I have?" "I'm saying," Maher continued, his voice rising, "that maybe you should have a little more perspective before you go around acting like you understand what everyday Americans go through. You live in a bubble, Samuel. A very expensive, very isolated bubble." "And what bubble do you live in, Bill?" Jackson fired back. "You sit here in your studio, night after night, judging everyone who walks through that door. You make your money by tearing people down, by being controversial for the sake of being controversial. And you have the audacity to lecture me about perspective?" Maher's face reddened. He wasn't used to guests fighting back this hard, especially not on his own show. I provide commentary. I say the things other people are afraid to say. That's my job. No, Jackson said, his voice steady but filled with intensity. Your job is supposed to be having meaningful conversations, but instead, you ambush your guests. You invite them here, make them think it's going to be one thing, and then you attack them to make yourself look clever. I don't need to make myself look clever, Maher snapped. I am clever, and if you can't handle tough questions, maybe you should stick to reading lines someone else wrote for you. The audience gasped. Several people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This had gone too far, and everyone in the room knew it except Maher. Jackson stood up slowly. He didn't rush, didn't make any sudden movements. He simply rose from his chair with the kind of dignified calm that comes from years of refusing to let anyone diminish you. Sit down, Samuel, Maher said, trying to sound authoritative but coming across as desperate. We're not done here. Yes, Jackson said quietly. We are. He began removing his microphone, carefully unclipping it from his lapel. The small sound of the equipment being unfastened seemed impossibly loud in the silent studio. Maher tried to laugh it off, looking to the audience for support. Oh, come on. Don't be so dramatic. This is what we do here. We have real conversations. Jackson paused, microphone in hand, and looked directly at Maher. Real conversations require mutual respect, Bill. Something you clearly don't understand. You don't want a conversation. You want a punching bag. Someone you can talk down to so you can feel better about yourself. That's not... Maher started, but Jackson cut him off. Let me finish, Jackson said, his voice carrying the weight of decades of experience, dealing with people exactly like Maher. I've been in this industry for a long time. I've dealt with directors who thought they could push me around, producers who thought they knew better, critics who thought they could define my worth. And you know what I learned? That people like that, people who need to tear others down to build themselves up, they're not worth my time or my energy. Maher's mouth opened and closed, searching for a response. For once in his career, he seemed genuinely at a loss for words. I came here tonight in good faith, Jackson continued. I came here to talk about a project I care about, something meaningful. Instead, you decided to use me as a prop for whatever point you were trying to make. And I'm not going to sit here and be disrespected on national television just so you can feel like you've won some argument. Samuel, I think you're overreacting, Maher tried, his voice now noticeably less confident. If you felt disrespected, that wasn't my intention. Yes, it was, Jackson said flatly. It absolutely was. Because that's what you do. That's your whole brand. Being the guy who says the uncomfortable things, who pushes boundaries. But there's a difference between being provocative and being cruel, between being honest and being a bully. The audience remained silent, watching this unfold like witnesses to a car crash. Some nodded slightly at Jackson's words. Others looked uncomfortable, unsure how to process what they were seeing. Maher stood up now too, trying to regain some semblance of control. Look, if we got off on the wrong foot here, we can start over. Let's just... No, Jackson interrupted. We're not starting over. I'm leaving. And before I go, let me say something to your audience. He turned to face the crowd directly. You all deserve better than this. You deserve hosts who want to have genuine conversations, who treat their guests with respect, who don't invite people on just to tear them down. Don't settle for this kind of cynical, mean-spirited entertainment. You're better than that. He placed his microphone on the chair where he'd been sitting and began walking toward the edge of the stage. Maher, now clearly panicking at the prospect of his show falling apart, called after him. Samuel, come on. Don't do this. Let's talk about it. Jackson stopped at the edge of the stage and turned back one last time. We just did talk about it, Bill. The difference is, I actually listened to what was happening. You were so busy trying to score points that you forgot there was a human being sitting across from you. I've had plenty of heated discussions on this show, Maher said defensively. People disagree. That's the whole point. Disagreement is fine, Jackson replied. Disrespect isn't. And you crossed that line the moment you dismissed my career, my work, and my perspective just to make yourself feel superior. I don't need this. I don't need you. And I certainly don't need to waste another second in a place where I'm not valued. Maher took a step forward. You're being incredibly unprofessional right now. Jackson actually laughed at that, a short, sharp sound without humor. I'm being unprofessional? That's rich coming from you. I've been nothing but professional since I walked in here. I answered your questions. I tried to engage with you honestly. And you repaid that by attacking me personally, by questioning my integrity, by suggesting that my success somehow makes my opinions invalid. That's not journalism, Bill. That's not even good television. That's just sad. The camera operators didn't know where to point their equipment. The producers in the control room were likely having a meltdown. This wasn't how the show was supposed to go. This wasn't the controlled chaos that Maher usually orchestrated. This was real, unscripted, and completely off the rails. I built this show on honest conversation, Maher insisted, his voice rising again. On saying things other people won't say. No, Jackson corrected him. You built this show on being controversial. There's a difference. Honest conversation requires listening. It requires respect. It requires treating the person across from you as an equal, not as a target. And you've done none of that tonight. A few audience members began to clap. Just a few at first, then more joined in. Not everyone, but enough to make it clear that Jackson's words were resonating. Maher looked stunned. His own audience was turning on him. Really? He said to the crowd. You're going to applaud this? He's walking off my show. Maybe ask yourself why, someone from the audience called out. Maher's face went from red to almost purple. He pointed at the person who'd spoken. Hey, I don't remember asking for your input. And I didn't ask for yours, Jackson said, drawing Maher's attention back to him. But you gave it anyway, repeatedly, without listening, without caring how it affected anyone else. That's your problem, Bill. You think your opinion is the only one that matters. You think being provocative gives you the right to be cruel. It doesn't. I am not cruel, Maher protested. Then what do you call what you did tonight? Jackson asked. You invited me here, set me up, and then attacked me for no reason other than to make yourself look good. If that's not cruel, what is it? Maher had no answer. He stood there, in the middle of his own stage, looking smaller somehow than he had at the beginning of the show. Jackson shook his head slowly. I feel sorry for you, Bill. I really do. Because you've built this entire career on tearing people down, and one day you're going to realize that it's left you completely alone. No amount of ratings or controversy is worth sacrificing your humanity. He turned to leave again, and this time Maher didn't try to stop him. The host just stood there, watching as one of the biggest stars in Hollywood walked off his set. But Jackson wasn't quite done. He paused one more time, looked back at Maher, and said, You know what the saddest part is? I actually used to respect you. I used to think you were brave for speaking your mind. But bravery isn't about punching down, Bill. It's not about making people feel small so you can feel big. Real bravery is admitting when you're wrong. Having the courage to treat people with kindness, even when it's not the most entertaining option. And you don't have that kind of courage. The silence that followed was deafening. Maher opened his mouth several times, trying to form words, but nothing came out. He looked lost, like a captain whose ship had just been taken over by the crew. Jackson finally walked off the stage completely, disappearing behind the curtain. The audience sat in stunned silence for several long seconds before erupting into scattered applause and confused murmuring. Maher stood alone on his stage, trying to process what had just happened. His show, his carefully controlled environment where he always had the last word, had just been turned upside down. and there was nothing he could do about it. He looked at the cameras, then at the audience, then back at the empty chair where Jackson had been sitting moments before. His signature smirk was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like shock. "Well," he finally said, his voice lacking its usual confidence, "I guess we'll go to commercial." But the damage was done. In those few minutes, the dynamic had shifted completely. Maher, who'd spent years positioning himself as the fearless truth-teller, had been exposed as nothing more than a bully who couldn't handle being challenged. Jackson, meanwhile, had walked away with his dignity intact, having stood up for himself in a way that was both powerful and controlled. The crew scrambled to cut to commercial, but not before the cameras caught Maher's face. The realization slowly dawning on him that he'd made a massive mistake. This wasn't the triumphant moment of television he'd planned. This was a disaster. Behind the scenes, Jackson was already removing the last of his equipment, getting ready to leave the building entirely. Staff members who'd witnessed the exchange were whispering amongst themselves, some looking sympathetic toward Jackson, others seeming shocked that anyone would walk off Maher's show. One production assistant approached Jackson nervously. "Mr. Jackson, is there anything we can—" Jackson held up a hand, not unkindly. "No, thank you. I appreciate it, but I'm done here. I should never have come in the first place." Back on the stage, as the commercial break continued, Maher paced back and forth, running his hands through his hair. Members of his team tried to talk to him, probably suggesting damage control strategies, or how to address what had just happened when they came back from break. But Maher seemed to be in his own world, replaying the confrontation in his mind, perhaps finally understanding how badly he'd miscalculated. The thing about people like Maher is they get so used to being the smartest person in the room, or at least positioning themselves that way, that they forget other people have agency too. They forget that not everyone will just sit there and take it. And when someone finally stands up to them, they don't know how to respond because it's so far outside their expected script. Jackson had done more than just walk off a talk show. He'd held up a mirror and forced Maher to see himself clearly, maybe for the first time in years, and that reflection wasn't flattering. As the commercial break ended and the show prepared to continue without its guest, Maher tried to compose himself. He straightened his jacket, took a deep breath, and faced the cameras again. But something had changed. The swagger was gone. The certainty was gone. In its place was something more human, more vulnerable, and far less entertaining. "We're back," he said, his voice subdued. "As you can see, Samuel L. Jackson has left the building, and I suppose we should talk about what just happened. But how do you talk about being completely dismantled on your own show? How do you explain to your audience that you pushed too hard, went too far, and paid the price for it?" Maher tried to find the words, stumbling through explanations that rang hollow even to his own ears. Meanwhile, Jackson was already in his car, driving away from the studio. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He'd said what needed to be said, stood up for himself when it mattered, and walked away with his head held high. That's the kind of strength that doesn't need validation from ratings, or viral clips, or think pieces written the next day. It's the kind of strength that comes from knowing your worth and refusing to let anyone diminish it, no matter how big their platform is. The studio audience that night left with a story they'd never forget. They'd witnessed something raw and real, something that broke through the usual polished veneer of television. Some of them probably felt uncomfortable. Others probably felt inspired. But none of them would forget watching Samuel L. Jackson stand up, speak his truth, and walk away from someone who'd underestimated him. And Maher? He finished his show that night, but it was clear to everyone watching that something fundamental had shifted. The Emperor had been revealed to have no clothes, and all the clever quips and controversial takes in the world couldn't change that. In that heated exchange, in those minutes of escalating tension and ultimate confrontation, two things became crystal clear. First, that respect isn't something you can demand. It's something you earn through how you treat others. And second, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply walk away from a situation where you're not valued. Jackson had come to that studio expecting a conversation. What he got was a confrontation. But instead of playing Maher's game, instead of engaging on terms designed to make him look bad, he changed the rules entirely. He refused to be diminished. He refused to participate in his own humiliation. And in doing so, he turned what was meant to be his defeat into his greatest victory. The microphone sitting on that empty chair became a symbol of something larger, a reminder that silence can be more powerful than words when those words are being used against you, that leaving can be braver than staying, that dignity matters more than entertainment. Maher had wanted to create a moment. He'd wanted controversy and clips that would go viral and get people talking about his show. And he got all of that, just not in the way he'd planned. Because the moment everyone would remember wasn't his clever gotcha questions or his provocative statements. It was Jackson's quiet refusal to accept being treated poorly. It was the sound of a microphone being set down and footsteps walking away. That's the thing about trying to make someone look small. Sometimes, in the process, you just make yourself look smaller. And once that happens, once people see through the act, it's almost impossible to put that genie back in the bottle. Jackson didn't need to burn any bridges on his way out. He didn't need to curse, or throw things, or make a scene beyond the one that was already happening. He just needed to be honest, speak his truth, and remove himself from a toxic situation. That's not drama for drama's sake. That's self-respect in action. And that's something Maher clearly hadn't counted on. He'd counted on Jackson playing along, getting flustered, maybe getting angry in a way that would make him look unreasonable. Instead, Jackson stayed calm, made his point clearly, and left on his own terms. He flipped the entire script. The beauty of the whole situation was in its simplicity. No elaborate revenge, no prolonged argument, no back